right, welcome back to another great episode of Secured Out Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Denny Caballero, and today I have the pleasure of bringing you Marcus Farris, the Post-Traumatic Growth Director of Mission 22. Marcus, thank you for being here today with me.
Denny, so happy you gave me the time.
Absolutely. Like I said before, I'm constantly looking for great programs, great resources for the audience, and for any veteran or family member that's out there. But one of the difficult things that I've run into is I can find plenty of resources that may provide resources for the service member. Might be able to give them training, provide advocacy, do sorts of outreach, but I can't find a lot of programs that cater to the service member, the family, and the overall community, our first responders, brothers and sisters. And that's something that I see with you in Mission 22. You support the family as well, which is something that I feel gets neglected. Now, when an operator or soft professional or any veteran gets out, the family is also going through a transition period, and it's not easy. Marcus, please tell us about Mission 22.
Yeah, so our company was founded about 10 years ago as a result of the founder, Magnus Johnson, who had spent about 8 years in the Army, most of that time as a Green Beret, going through several deployments. And upon his return home, he found that his journey to transition into something other than being an operator was marked with confusion, with a lot of pain and uncertainty about what's next, and a surprising amount of, let's say, baggage to deal with on the way back. He lost one of his friends to suicide around that time and came to the realization that this is a much bigger problem than is really talked about at all. And he kind of surveyed the landscape and looked at the VA funding, looked at the thousands of other veterans charities that are out there, and then really started digging into the numbers of how many we're losing per day. And was just asked the question, like, why is this still the case? Like, what's missing here? What's the missing piece? Like, this, one is too many, but the number at the time, of course, where we got our name from, like roughly 24, about 22 people per day, is just absolutely excessive and unacceptable. And so part of his mission initially was to just raise awareness that this is an issue that's going on, that the number of service members that we've lost back home far exceeds those that we've lost at OIF and OEF. And out of that grew eventually the program that we have now called the Recovery and Resiliency Program. This was a program that was started about 3 or so years ago. And this was basically the culmination of Magnus's healing journey into a singular program. So in some sense, the entire company kind of has his personality, and it's sort of an outstretch of the help that he needed that's now helping others. And so I joined the team around the time of this flagship program, R&R, getting spun up. And basically what this program is it's a collection of all of the stuff that helped him through, just packaged in a much more coherent and kind of step-by-step way. We currently have programs tailored for combat veterans that last about 12 months. We have programs for, there's a 6-month version that's really for any veteran, and also a 6-month version for the spouses of veterans. And you mentioned before that the families often need a lot of help. And you can think of that in a very basic way of like, well, what do you do with a service member who's like currently experiencing a flashback? Okay, so there's that kind of level of awareness. But then a more profound question occurs when you ask the question, well, what happens when that veteran that you were previously helping through this is now recovering and is now on the other side of it and is now kind of becoming a new person? It's almost like if you don't grow with him or her, then the family also struggles to keep up with that as well. And so that's kind of another part of the facilitation for that family growth that we're after in our programs.
Yeah. It's shocking that people don't realize how much support our families need on the backside. It's not an easy thing. Our soft community are tight-knit. The families support each other. The husbands always hanging out outside of work. The kids are together. The wives are together. When these families transition, just like a lot of other military families, they're going into a community that they don't have any resources in. They don't have any friends plugged in. It is exceptionally difficult. And that just amplifies the amount of stress that the husband feels or the wife feels. And of course, you add more stress and add financial issues. It's a powder keg. I've seen it. I've been witnessing it a lot more. With the drawdown in Afghanistan, the final end to the war that we so intimately have grown to know for so long. A lot of guys are starting to leave. They're starting to go, and they're not taking the time to prepare themselves, and they're finding themselves in hardship and in dire situations. What are some of the ways that you've done your outreach as an organization to try to get as many software individuals to get involved prior to getting out, so they know that, hey, there are resources here you can use?
That's an effort that's been kind of a multi-pronged approach for us. So the most simple example would be our ambassador program. So we have a ton of people who you don't necessarily have to be a veteran to be an ambassador that help facilitate events all across the country. And you can visit Mission 22's website, which is just mission22.com. And there's a full list of events where you'll find others who are part of our organization. The pedigree of the company is found within the Green Beret community, but as a former Green Beret yourself, you know the strategy of force multiplication through like train a few and then send them out, right? And so that really is kind of what we're doing on multiple levels. So we're training like we have a very small core team, but we have we like to think an outsized effect on others understanding how veterans can get plugged into resources and what the journey home looks like, right? And so we're hoping that by teaching people how to kind of recover and sort of come back home, psychologically speaking, from some type of a kind of journey into the abyss, as it were, then they can then become teachers for others, right? And so if an old mentor of mine used to say, if you teach something, you learn it twice. And we're teaching everybody who's within our program, this is how you heal yourself, and this is how you heal others. And it's basically the same thing. It's just a matter of how many people are involved there. One of the things that I've been challenged on is when we think of like impact, you kind of think like, oh, well, if you get invited for this keynote speech and then like tens of thousands of people see you, it's like, wow, you've reached it. You've really done a good thing. Or you sell 1 million copies of a book. Man, you've really expanded and you've had this impact and this and that. But the truth is, you can talk to one person and make a difference in their life. And that might as well be, for all you know, more impactful than the keynote speech. And as an example of that, there's a gentleman who, Magnus, the founder of the company, who was a homeless veteran. The story goes, he was like under an underpass or some other, he was out, not in a house, just roaming around and clearly needed some help. And, if you were to put this into like a parable, you might say like, oh, you're on the way to go and give this huge speech, but then something called you to speak to this one person.
Yeah.
And he went and talked to him and offered him, basically extended an invitation of seeing his life in a different perspective. And fast forward a few years, and he's actually become one of the biggest advocates for Mission 22. And he himself has done spreading of the message. And so one of the things that we're continually humbled by is just the effect that single individuals can have when at one point they saw, hey, I'm a warrior. I can go down range. I can cause some damage and destruction for the sake of our freedom and our country. Also, I can take that energy and direct it toward something else that's really awesome. And everybody has kind of a unique story of what that looks like when they're back home. But a lot of people don't realize, like, hey, that instinct to fight is still there and can still be cultivated into something really amazing. And if you go to Mission 22's YouTube page, we have a couple of mini documentaries of folks who have gone through the program, and you can kind of see firsthand what they've been doing.
Yeah. I want to ask you that you mentioned it earlier. There are a lot of resources out there, and I feel like some are better suited, better equipped. But we can't turn our nose at any resource out there. But what sets Mission 22 aside from other organizations that are out there trying to help veterans?
What sets it aside is that basically all of the different healing modalities that have been researched, that have been talked about, that have been teased in the clinical settings, it's all just in a coherent package where it really hasn't been before. So basically, the R&R program combines it's a cohort model. So you're going through together with others on the same journey. It's got a series of books that you read, about one per month, that are all tailored, like hand selected for a growth journey. It's got supplements that are specifically for mental health. It's got meditation devices that are specifically for getting your fight or flight system calmed down so that you can have more top down conscious control of that. It teaches other practices of mindfulness. It's got devices that will show your stress score in real time, so that if you're wondering, if you've never been into like meditation or mindfulness or other, like, it's like, how do I know if the needle is moving? It's like, look at your wrist, press this button, and it's right there. And you've got a health coach that helps you through it all. You've got an advocate who knows a little bit about nutrition, knows a little bit about motivations for different things, and can help guide you along. You're never alone. You have all of the tools that you need. It equips you with all of that stuff right at hand. And so it removes any sort of dependency on another organization for your healing. It puts the healing back in the hands of the individual. Now, it does take work, of course, and this is kind of part of the deal. If you're going to do R&R, the results that you get out, of course, are what you put in. Like, no one is going to heal you for you. And
exactly.
we understand that. We understand that concept of like us as kind of the healers, as it were. We're more facilitators than we are healers. Like, we show, hey, do this and do this and do this, and your life will be different. But we're going to negotiate with like what that looks like for you. And then it's on you to do that work. And so we're not here to like, here, take these pills and then like have them adjusted once a month. Or like, we're decidedly non-clinical, right? And there are times where referrals are necessary. And we continue to refine our program to figure out when that line is. I recently went through my clinical mental health counseling master's program. So I'm kind of now equipped with a bit of the clinical know-how to be kind of be able to be more aware of how to navigate those tougher situations. But for most individuals, they need something slightly more than health coaching, but often slightly less than clinical counseling. And so we're kind of there to bridge that gap and to really give you a utility belt of everything that you need. And so by the time you're through with this program, if you're struggling to make progress, it's not a matter of ignorance. It's a matter of commitment.
Yeah, commitment. I always say that you have to be an active and willing participant in your own recovery, in your own journey. Anybody that's gone through SEER school or gone through training for, if you're isolated in a dangerous environment, yeah, there's people that are going to be notified. People are going to come out there to try to rescue you, but you have a role in your own rescue as well. You have to do some work. You can't stay in comfort. A lot of times, depression, anxiety, and all the other mental health issues that we face can eventually become comfortable. It feels okay to stay in that state. It's okay to stay depressed. I'll stay in my room with Netflix and order from DoorDash. Yeah, hell yeah. I don't want to go outside. It's comfort, and it's killing us. Numbing ourselves with, substances like alcohol, and it's only furthering and damaging us. And we often sort of speak our own misery into existence. And it sucks. I've seen friends struggle with that. I've seen friends struggle. There are families right there, right in front of them, telling them, please get sober, please get help, please raise your hand and go in. And they half step it. They take a step here, a step there. And the entire time they're dealing with the ambivalence of, okay, maybe I can get sober. Maybe I can get better. Do I really want to? And that's the hard part. It's getting an individual to see that they can have their life back, an even better version of their life. As you're working with our veteran population, that has to be difficult. I know I see it, but when you're dealing with amazing programs and you see all these great tools that you're bringing for individuals, how does that affect you?
Yeah, seeing the one way I like to look at that struggle of, I know where I want to go, but there's this sort of huge barrier between me and that. You talked about how it's really comfortable to kind of stay stay in sort of the status quo, because there are a lot of substitute agents that can elevate you in a manner that's not sustainable, but can do it. So it's kind of like if you
Hmm.
imagine like this mountain that has two lakes on either side, and one lake is kind of at a lower elevation. It's a little swampy. It's kind of, it smells weird, but you're on a boat on that lake. But and then you've seen pictures of the lake that's on the opposite side of the mountain. But that lake's at a slightly higher elevation. It's clear, it's pristine, it's unpolluted, but you're okay floating along for a little while. And there's this mountain to climb between you and getting to that other state. But once you're at the other lake, in this example, then you can also kind of float there. You've kind of increased your frequency to that point. And it requires a team to help you through. Like only you can do the climbing, but that's part of the reason why we don't have people go through this alone. Because when you're in the middle of that climbing up and over that mountain, it can be really hard to kind of hold the vision for the other side. And that's another thing too that we're trying to do and see in other people's lives is like there's a bigger vision here, and let's see if we can't articulate that in some way and give you like kind of lower the tide on all of the other just stress responses and physiological things that are coming up, and show you like there's another way to do this. And yeah, again, just like seeing what those stories amount to has been like, it's definitely been humbling to me. It's a good reminder that like that result that they had, that they get to now own, you could have never thought of that for them. We have people through the program who like going up a flight of stairs without losing their breath is an accomplishment. But then they go on to do like even greater things than that. And it's like, hey, I've signed up for my first 10K. And then the coach gets to sit there and like, hey, do you remember like 6 months ago when you were struggling to get up the stairs? And they were like, oh, man, yeah. So it's like, I hear stories like that all the time. And that definitely keeps our team buoyed.
Yeah, absolutely. That being able to take part and witness that's beautiful. Being able to see somebody wake back up and become alive again after just surviving, which is something that is so devastating to see play out with your own friends, your own peers, that they just give up. You start to see them just give up on life. Now, addiction has become a big thing, something that I see with our community. How are you guys equipped to dealing with the alcohol and drug addiction problem? Is that something that you guys can help with? And how have you seen an uprise in situations like that?
Part of the screening process of joining R&R is like our requirement is that you need to have been sober for 30 days. So this is not an acute phase addiction program. And I mentioned, I used the analogy before about like lowering the tide. If the tide is so high that the individual is really struggling with like active addiction, then this program is probably not the right time for them. But that's not to say that folks who maybe were sober for 30 days and joined don't still struggle with that. And so it kind of gives them another set of like, hey, when you're feeling this way, well, first off, is kind of raising the awareness of going step by step of, hey, what do you feel in your body when you're starting to have those cravings? What is it you're afraid to feel? And then providing I heard this term the other day that I really liked. So in the context of kind of a healing relationship that you might have with a health coach or maybe a type of counselor, there exists a space of what's termed a safe emergency, which I sort of liked. And so the idea is you have an opportunity to kind of flesh out and let some of the dark stuff see the light of day. And when that stuff comes out, sometimes it's like, oh man, I knew there's some stuff down there, but I didn't know exactly the nature of it. And when I actually see that surface, it's a little shocking. But in this scenario, it's allowed to come out. And so one of the things that we remind participants all the time is we expect effort, but not perfection. And so what that might look like is like, hey, if you're having a rough time of it, just tell us. We're not there to, shame you or to tell you like, you can't be in this, like you're dropped from this program now. Like just keep communication up. Like we want to know how you're doing. And I think by providing an example of a team that has that attitude, then the individual might be able to have that attitude with themselves. In the AA model, like relapse is part of the thing. And within the R&R model, relapse, so to speak, not necessarily with alcohol, but it could be, is part of the thing. And so It's kind of like in the Exodus story where the Israelites are trying to get away from Egypt. Like the trip through the wilderness is part of the thing before you get to the promised land. And so as soon as you get out into the wilderness, what's striking in that story is the people immediately were like, oh man, it's been 3 days without food. Wouldn't it have been better if we were back with the tyrant? Like, okay, cool. Did you forget like that all that stuff before? Um, and so we talk about like the Netflix and the DoorDash is like, that sounds great. It's like, hey, bro, that's
Yeah.
slavery, man. Like it feels kind of good, but you are now enslaving yourself to things that are not on your side. Things
Yeah.
that do not like they want to see their own glory fulfilled, not yours. And that can feel good for a little while when stuff is being taken care of and you can just sit back. But like, man, that long term, that is the type of slavery. And to get you through to the other side, we're going to show you like the struggle. Like if you find that you're struggling, that is identifying growth. And so with the throes of addiction, another attitude that I've heard that I kind of liked, it's like, it's not so much a question of why does anyone become addicted to things. It's more like, why aren't more people addicted? Because of
Yeah.
like, how else do you deal with the tragedy that life offers? Because the tragedy that life offers is something that, for those listening, but you can probably think back to like, yep, that was pretty horrible. Like I can't even, it was such a horrible thing that I don't even know if I could bring that to my pastor because he's probably not going to be able to relate to me. And I don't need just like a Band-Aid Bible verse. I need something much deeper that can really speak to the profanity that maybe I've experienced. And perhaps there's not a better word to that. And so in that setting, and that, imagine that person is surrounded by a community who it's like addictive stuff is just there. And it's available. And so it becomes kind of no wonder, like given all of those data points, it's like, it's a wonder that more people aren't struggling with addiction. So anyway, that's kind of the model that we're starting from is like, we understand that there's sort of going to be a dip. There's going to
Yeah.
be a part of this where you are going to meet resistance, guaranteed. If you're not meeting resistance, you're not growing. And one of the ways that we're training up our coaches is to be able to meet their participants where they're at in that particular journey.
Yeah. That's absolutely correct. Like being able to meet somebody exactly where they're at. It's important. We can't, you can't start immediately trying to shove and force somebody to go 100 miles an hour. Now, how do you guys help bring back the spirit? Because a lot of times we talk about mind, body, spirit, and all three being at a deficit. When we get out, we're broken mentally, we're broken physically, and for a lot of us, spiritually as well. How can Mission 22 help with that?
Yeah. So the model of post-traumatic growth that we're following is not a model that we invented whole cloth. It's one that's been around for a really long time. So one of the things that we're teaching is that this pattern of trying to return back home from war is a pattern that humans have dealt with for a really long time. I was listening to an old podcast with Naval Ravikant where he talks about how the oldest problems have the oldest solutions. So the problems that have been around the longest are the problems that we as human species have been solving and working at the longest. So the first thing I do is look at what the ancients have done. And if you look at the Iliad and the Odyssey, for example, you'll notice that the journey to war was just as long as the journey back home from war. So what does that tell you? Like getting deployed and then coming back home are equally as extensive journeys. The problem with the way that we do it as a country and the way that we do it in the West is that you can take a service member who's literally been on the front lines of combat, firing their M4 at an enemy platoon or whatever, and 7 days later be flown back to Fort Lewis and be expected to shop for groceries.
Yeah.
Like that's not an exaggeration. Like
It's
no,
not.
that's not
It's
how
the
we
truth.
do it. Okay. So look, and there's in the modern mind, if you look at the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, you might look at all of those laws and regulations. And it's like, oh, that's outdated for some past time. It's not really for us and this and that. It's curious that they have. Now, listen, I eat bacon, right? So we're not going to get too much into. But there's I believe it's in Samuel or Kings where he talks about the purification process of the warrior coming back home. And
Yeah.
so there's this idea of being purified by water and by fire. And then there's like a 7-day time period, which is just, it's not necessarily 7, like a week. The idea of 7 is like a complete passing of a season.
Mm.
And then there's a sacrifice that's made. So what do these components mean to us today? Because we're not going out, like, I'm not going to give a live sheep or something to a redeploying platoon. The point is that the idea of water and fire as being purification elements is that, one, there's kind of a burning away of who you used to be.
Yeah.
So no matter how many books you've read or how many movies you've watched or how many stories you've heard, until you experience combat yourself, you never know what that's going to do to you. It will change you, and you can't go back to who you were before. And you have to burn away part of who you were before. So what does that mean? It means, to use a term from Richard Rohr's Falling Upward book, he talks about the first half of life journey and the second half of life journey, and how there's kind of a part of you that's sort of this soldier on the inside that's helping you navigate the world. Like, because you're a child, here are the rules. Here's what you need to follow. Here's what you need to understand about human behavior. Here's how you move forward. When you become an adult, you have to dismiss that particular soldier and adopt a new one. There's a certain radical updating of one's worldview that has to happen after you come back from some type of combat. Now, for those who are listening and haven't been to combat, this is a metaphor for many things in life. You don't have to be a warrior or a soldier necessarily to experience the trials of moral injury.
Mm-hmm.
And so the burning away is the purification by fire. You have to put to death an old way of being. Okay. Now, the purification by water is kind of like, you have to now replace that with something else. So one thing has to go and another thing has to replace it. And this is going to take a season of work. Okay. So that's the pattern, right? I've talked about these patterns and these old stories because one thing I learned in my clinical mental health counseling program is that there's a version of therapy called narrative therapy. And the idea there is like, hey, let's go back and look at the story of your life and then look at the thing that happened that you were not expecting to happen, right? This is the moral injury point where the way that you understood human behavior to be, the moral landscape of the world gets broken in a very traumatic, immediate fashion, right? So, okay, so we're looking at our stories in light of something that we couldn't have accommodated before. And so that is a moment, technically speaking, of awe. So awe is an emotion that is related to experiencing something that current knowledge structures cannot accommodate for. I won't get too much into the nerdy science of it unless we want to go there today. But the point is
always.
So imagine you're flying out in space. You've got a cool little spacecraft, and you're coming close to a planet, right? And so the planet has a gravitational pull. Let's say it's a very large planet. And even if your thrusters are like, they didn't change, the amount of energy going out of the thrusters hasn't changed, your ship is going to start to turn because of the gravitational pull. And that's kind of like a moment of moral injury or a moment of awe. Sometimes I'll describe a negative experience of awe as dread. So basically, it's when you experience something that's much bigger than yourself, and then you have some type of response to that. So here's a really cool thing that I learned about the neural circuitry of this. So if you look at cats when they bow up their back, right, what they're doing is it's a predator response. So they see something that's bigger than them that could eat them, that could kill them. So in an encounter of awe for the cats, this is the same neural circuitry that we have for piloerection, which is just a way of saying goosebumps. Your hair is standing on end, right? So what happens is you see a predator and then you bow your back if you're a cat, or if you're a human, you have goosebumps and you have this sensation of awe. So what's happening there, at least from an evolutionary perspective, is you are embodying a part of the predator so that it is a defense against the predator. So what does that mean? It means you just discovered there's a monster inside you. So what do you do with that? You realize that there's a bigger story where you learn that there's a shadow part of you and you learn what to do with it, right? To use the words of Jordan Peterson, he says, a good man is not a tame man, but a dangerous man who has that under control. From Carl Jung, the death psychologist from the 20th century, he uses the term integrating the shadow. And so part of returning to that spiritual aspect of this whole journey is understanding that this isn't just some kid's book, right? It's sort of like the moment of, if you cast your mind back to the original Thor, the Marvel's Thor. They're reading the ancient stories. Like there's that kid's book, right, with Loki and Thor, and it's sort of telling the
Yeah.
stories. And then Chris Hemsworth comes in. He's like, "Yep, that's us." It's like this thing. This isn't a child's story. This is a thing. This is how it works. And so that's kind of what we're teaching. I personally come from kind of a more Judeo-Christian background, if I didn't make that obvious already. But I'm not. This isn't a program that's like, we're going to hit you over the head with like, you need to start going to this church. Like, that's not really what we're after. But the point is, like AA fully acknowledges this. Like, there's a higher power component here.
Yes.
And the way that I initially, or we as a team kind of communicate that, is we need to relearn what that bigger grand narrative is that you get to be a part of, which, by the way, our country as a whole has lost. And in the late 19th century, both Fyodor Dostoevsky and Friedrich Nietzsche, a fiction writer as well as one of the great philosophers of the last 200 years, they basically predicted that this is what was going to happen, right? The whole declaration of God is dead was a lament by Nietzsche, right? And so the whole idea was like, look, in the West, we're losing sight of this bigger narrative, of this bigger driving force of what we're up to. And when you lose that, you lose the meaning of your daily actions with a higher calling. And that sucks. Like that's a state of nihilism. Like, why am I doing what I'm doing? What's the vision of our country? What's the vision
I don't want to disrupt you too much, but you hit it right in the head. Currently rereading Richard Rohr's The Wisdom Pattern, and man, yeah, like wavelengths are crossing, like that understanding that there's nothing, just that nothingness. Like, no, that's not reality. That's not the world we're living in. Mm-hmm. But we are constantly being re-engaged with this idea, or being forced to engage with the idea that there's nothing. It's chaos, disorder. Yeah. No.
Right. And so one of the things that is difficult about a lot of service members transitioning out of the military is that you have to ask, like, well, what was it all for? Especially when you look at the way of how we exited Afghanistan, there are a lot of people, rightly so, who saw that and it was just devastating. I don't want to get too political here today, but the point is that it's like, I was part of that story, and then that story had a horrible ending. That was a tragedy, right? So tragedy, it starts kind of okay and then gets bad, versus a comedy, which is the reverse. And so what we're trying to get at is like, yeah, that was the result of sin and evil in the world. Like, the fact that you're upset about that is proof that like it meant something, and that how it ended was objectively wrong. Okay. However, that whole story of you going to war was a picture of a bigger story of what you're fighting for. Mm-hmm. It's bigger than the country, by the way. It's bigger, like it's the most important story that you were a part of. So I'll give an example from a movie maybe a few of your listeners have seen. It's called Braveheart. It's some people have watched it. And so you could, like, everyone loves that movie, right? One of the best movies ever made. And so I'm already getting goosebumps thinking about it. How about that? You see the end of the movie. Spoiler for those who haven't watched it yet. If you haven't watched it yet, stop what you're doing, go watch Braveheart. And at the very end of the movie, of course, our hero is killed in like the most gruesome fashion you can imagine. Basically, it's like it's a retelling of the like crucifixion story, essentially. And you might think like, well, hang on, he died and they lost. Like like you don't see the end of the movie where they rally and win their freedom. But it's like, well, why did he purposefully put himself through that whole sacrifice? And if you remember, there's that scene where he's offered like an analgesic, basically like something to numb the pain, and he refuses. Why is that a component of our hero's story? Well, because he understands the weight of that suffering and what it means. He didn't die for the sake of Scotland. He died for the spirit of freedom as such, which is a way of saying that spirit is something that's real and above and beyond material. And the entire country knew that. And since that spirit had been sacrificed to, you could say, that's what rallied the nation and allowed a specific country in a specific place and time to have their own freedom in a limited way. The cynic might come in and be like, well, whatever, history went on, they all died, 100, 200 years from now, no one's going to remember them, or whatever your time domain is. And it's like, that's a bad story. first off. Second, what I'm proposing here is that you're sacrificing for something bigger and outside of yourself. So in a relationship, let's say it's a triad. So with two people, there's a triad. So what is that? So you might have heard, like, in a relationship, you don't split 50-50, you split 100-0. And if both people are playing that game, then it's a healthy relationship. I don't know why they write all those relationships books. That's all you need to know. So anyway, you might think on one level, maybe I should keep score. Like, if you haven't been returning back to me all the sacrifices I've been giving to you, why am I still playing this game? And taken to an extreme, like, there should be reciprocity and all of that. But again, both people need to be playing that game. But let's say there's this particular spouse who's resentful, and even the other, like, they've been sacrificing, and then the other person, like, cheats on them and then leaves. It's like, why did I play the game of giving up something now for something better later? That's the idea of the sacrifice. Because you weren't sacrificing for the other person, you're sacrificing for the relationship itself. It's a third thing that you are in service to. That's the whole idea of, like, the idea of the marriage covenant is that both people, they're not serving each other, they're serving the marriage. But by serving the marriage, they serve each other better. So that's kind of the idea of being a part of a much bigger story than yourself. There's always a triad of service. So for the service member metaphor, it might be the individual warrior, the war itself, and then freedom as such. Not freedom in the sense of, like, freedom and democracy as our politicians say it, although those were originally our ideals. It's something even bigger than the country. And when you look at it from that kind of perspective, then I would hope that that's a bit of an antidote to the very, let's say, well-evidenced reasons for why one might have cynicism about the state of affairs in our world today.
Yeah. That was well said. It's so hard to try to explain that when somebody is dealing with so much trauma. And you can only, and I experienced it in the same way. I wasn't open to listening to a lot of what you just shared until I was at a treatment center, until I was able to remove myself from all the noise of the world that I was surrounded by. Because when you're surrounding yourself by other people going through the same pain and not paying attention to it, not wanting to get better, and you're just numbing out, you're not open to hearing the truth. You're not open to hearing the possibility that your point of view, the world the way you see the world around you could be a flawed perspective. And holy shit, the moment that I realized, I was like, wow, there's a lot of providers here that are telling me a lot of things that make more sense. And man, why am I so willing to just be negative all the time? And then the shift occurs. Finally, the shift occurs where you're like, wow, like, okay, this stuff makes sense. This is a better way of living. This is providing me with a sense of purpose and understanding. And that right there, that sense of purpose, like, that is something that even when guys are able to go to a treatment center like Laurel Ridge or Emerald Coast here in Panama City, when they get out and they have this idea of, like, okay, I'm going to transition. I'm going to make that shift from active duty to retire. But what is my new purpose? What is my new goal in life? That's the other difficult thing to try to express and try to talk through with somebody. Is that something that you offer with your services going through Mission 22? Because that's another vital thing, is finding that purpose again. What is your why now?
Yeah, I would say the way that we approach that, and this is, I'll reference one of our mini documentaries where one of our former Marines ended up opening up his own yoga studio, right? Because anytime you think Marines, you think yoga. So
every time.
Yeah. Anyway, so the way that I'll throw out a clinical term here again. The term is self-efficacy, or feeling like you have agency. Yep. The idea is that if we can show you through actions that you're taking for yourself that you're not stuck and helping to shift your paradigm of like, I don't have to continue to live this way forever. I don't have to stay in these habits. Habits can be broken and new life for me can be realized. If we can just teach someone that and give them the tools to facilitate their bodies believing it too, and
Yeah.
that might be a strange phrase that I just said, and we can double tap on that later. But the idea is like, if we can offer them a new paradigm, they know from that point of like, oh, well, if I'm not stuck doing this, then well, what else is possible? Maybe I could start my own business. Maybe I could do this. Maybe I could do that. And each individual, that this is where the idiosyncrasies of the hero's journey get really fun to watch. Like you never know what your participant is gonna end up doing, because they might come day one of just like feeling like they're lost, like they don't even have a map to get out of this wilderness. And then by day 365, it's like, hey, I'm going to scuba school now. Like,
Yeah.
that's rad, man. And so we don't necessarily do any specific like career counseling stuff. We do have an organization that we will refer out to for folks who are like really struggling with that. Although a lot of times, like, people who've been in the military are usually pretty ambitious, highly conscientious people, which means that they're very committed to a sense of duty to something. And so when we invite them into a paradigm where it's like, hey, that sense of duty that you had and maybe we're disillusioned with for all the reasons we already talked about, look, you can do that in other places. And I'm going to leave you to decide what that looks like because you know your interests best. So that's how that's stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Marcus, I want to take a little bit of time to highlight you and ask you questions. One thing that I've noticed about service members that go into this line of work, specifically in mental health, is that there's often a story, there's often a connection as to why they chose to be a healer. What's your story?
Well, so I've been in the military for about a decade now. I graduated from Auburn University from their ROTC program and moved to Alaska around, when was that? Would have been summer of 2013. And I served up there for the better part of 5 years between JBER, which is in the Joint Base Elmendorf Richardson in Anchorage, and then 2 more years at Fort Wainwright as a project engineer with the Corps. I then transitioned into reserve duty, which I'm doing now as a PSYOPer. So I'm currently a PSYOP company commander. So I've got a bit of a dual role with working with veterans on the other side and also working with veterans who are currently serving. And so I graduated with an industrial engineer degree, but I had been doing endurance sports for quite some time. And I had it on my heart to like do something with that. And for a while, I was part of a nonprofit called the U.S. Military Endurance Sports Team. And that was a cool way to facilitate that hobby. But it was something that like I want more of that. Like military members doing endurance sports. Okay, that sounds pretty good. Well, am I a coach? Well, not so much in the sense of like a swim coach or like a running coach or something, but I like something was there. Now, after I moved out of Alaska, I moved to Central Oregon, and the marriage that I was in at the time just fell apart. I learned one day that my ex had cheated on me, and that was my own kind of moral injury. Like I was not like this Bible Belt sheltered kid was not prepared for that bit of news. And so that was the better part of a 2.5 to 3 year healing I had to go through myself, which by the way, was almost exactly the same time that I got picked up by Mission 22. So again, that was like the help that I needed was the help that I saw myself ended up giving. And that's actually what led me to write my first book, which is titled No Less Faithful, How the Scars of Divorce Reveal the Heart of God, which is available on Amazon. And so that whole writing process, like I've enjoyed writing a lot too. And I didn't know how to make that into like a career or like the thing that I do often for work. That's, the old saying of like, if you enjoy what you do, you don't work a day in your life. Like for me, writing and helping other people through hard things, especially as it relates to helping them learn how to do exercise and fitness, and then throw in some psychology, it's like that is a great constellation of stuff for me. And so I, after having been with Mission 22 for a little while, they ended up having me go through this counseling program where I could kind of continue to hone those skills. And then eventually we'll be doing some research with the efficacy of R&R. And now I'm writing another book on moral injury and working through that from a slightly different perspective. And Yeah, and so it's really been an awesome way of how a lot of things that felt like really frayed ends of the tapestry wove together into what I'm doing now, into something that somehow coheres my background in engineering, which is a profession that's more interested in things than people, with a new profession of counseling, which is a profession that's more interested in people than things, into a coherent program where I'm helping people through understanding things. So so that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm continuing my endurance competitive journey and some other hobbies, but that's kind of me in a nutshell, and that's where we're going.
Man, that is a lot. That is, I definitely, when you said you're an engineer, I was not expecting you to have done so much, and a book and another book on the way. Like that's incredible. What's the name of the book again?
The first book I've published is No Less Faithful: How the Scars of Divorce Reveal the Heart of God.
Awesome. And that's available on Amazon. We'll throw that up on the episode description as well. Marcus, I want to thank you for being here and sharing so much insight as to what Mission 22 does for all veterans, not just soft professionals. And thank you for not only continuing to serve, but continuing to take care of other veterans when they need help and assistance, man. Like it is not a job that a lot of people are flocking to. We still have a mental health care worker deficiency in our country. There's not enough. I'm constantly engaging with organizations and asking, like, what does it look like? It's like, we need more providers. We need more providers. And I think that who else is better suited than our veteran community? So I think that more people should look at that as an option. I know it's not as attractive as that awesome contracting gig, but I definitely think that we need more veterans employed in this field, because a lot of times that's who we're comfortable sharing and talking with. It's that shared suffering, that experience. But yeah, thank you so much for being here today. The organization is Mission 22. What are all the handles? Can we find you guys on Instagram, social media, and what's a website?
Yep, we're pretty much on all the social medias out there. For a while, we had a TikTok there going, but I would say Instagram and Facebook are the easiest places to find us. Mission 22, don't spell out 22, it's the digits.com, mission22.com. You'll find a bunch of information there. Also, links to other free programs that we have. And yeah, thanks so much for hosting me. This was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we'll see you all next time. Take care.